Welcome everyone to Hot Paper Lantern Digital Sports' first webinar in its Sports Are Back series. I am Ashley Rodriguez. I'm a reporter at Business Insider, where I cover the intersection of sports betting and media, among other things. 2020 was poised to be a banner year for the legal sports betting industry in the US. Then the coronavirus pandemic hit and live sports ground to a halt. With sports slowly returning, I'm here with a panel of experts to discuss how the sports betting industry can emerge from this moment. The folks at HPL Digital Sport also recently put out a new study looking at who the sports bettor is and what their habits are. So we'll dive into some of those findings as well. In just a moment, we're going to meet our wonderful experts who have joined us today, but we also want to hear from all of you and make this as interactive as possible. You should see a poll question pop up on your screen shortly. We'll be asking a number of poll questions throughout the webinar. For this first one, we'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you here today. I'd encourage you all to use the Q&A function in Zoom as well to submit any questions that you may have for our panelists. We will do our best to get through as many as we can within the next hour. And we also plan to continue the conversation on social media afterward. So if you want to tweet any comments or share anything on social media, you can use the hashtag HPLDS webinar. And again, that's HPLDS webinar, where you can submit comments or questions before or after this presentation. Our first poll question, I think, should hopefully be live on your screens now. So please tell us a little bit about yourselves, and we will tell you about us. Ed, would you kick it off for us?
I'd be happy to. Ashley, thank you, and thank you for being part of this as our host. I'm Ed Moed. I'm the CEO of Hot Paper Lantern. Hot Paper Lantern Digital Sport is a specialty group within our communications, marketing, and branding firm, and we help fantasy sports, e-betting organizations to build a brand and to build customers through acquisition. I'm excited to be here because through the study that Ashley mentioned, we saw there was a real gap in what media, the marketplace, our clients understood or didn't understand about the sports bettor. And we were able to do this study at the beginning and throughout what we're experiencing with COVID-19 to get a real good understanding of their perceptions, how they're feeling, and how platforms need to engage with them as we move back into sports. So thanks for having me, Ashley.
We also have Yasin Abbak, who joins us from Fantasy Life. Yasin, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Yasin. I run the Fantasy Life app, co-founded by ESPN's Matthew Berry. We are a fantasy and sports betting community platform. We offer a significant competitive advantage through crowdsourced advice, reports, and the fastest breaking news alerts in the industry.
I would also like to welcome Rick Wolf. Rick was a founding member of the Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association, and he is the president of FantasyAlarm.
Yeah, hi everybody. And I've been in the fantasy industry definitely longer than anybody on the screen. So basically was lucky enough to fall into it when I was an IBM programmer back in 1989. And I've been in the fantasy sports industry ever since, or waving the flag for it. CBSSports.com is probably what I'm best known for, helping start Sportsline USA in 1995, which became CBSSports.com. And I helped found RotoWorld in 2001, and which was sold to NBCSports.com. And then I ran digital over there for 5 years, sports digital business development for 5 years before now doing FantasyAlarm and WagerAlarm, which are to super serve the fantasy player and the sports bettor to be able to have more information so you can learn, play, and win.
Thank you all for joining me today. I'm looking forward to a lively discussion. I want to start off with a bit of a temperature check on where you all are right now. We've gone more than 2 months at this point without sports. They're just starting to trickle back, but the lives of sports fans and the lives of sports bettors have also changed in that time period. You know, we're not only in a pandemic, unemployment is rising, there has been widespread civil unrest. I'd love to just go around the virtual room and hear your biggest takeaways from the last couple of months and what this really means for the sports and the sports betting worlds for you. We'd also like to hear from our audience. We're going to be running another poll question shortly, so keep a eye out for that one. But Yasin, if you could kick this one off.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the most recent news that just came out just a little over 10 minutes ago is that the NBA Board of Governors has voted to approve the league's 22-team format to restart the season in Orlando. So that just came out, and that's just, I guess, incredible news, because for those of us that watch sports, it's been a bit boring. But other than that, on the business side, I think this has actually been, we will see it as an eventual boon for the business, because there has been so much, states are looking for revenue sources at the moment. And there were a lot of legislative road bumps ahead of the sports betting legalization across the landscape across the country. And having no sports and knowing that people are eager to place potential bets when sports do open up, I think it's actually providing legislators a reason to accelerate not just the legalization of sports betting in their states, but also the legalization of the most important type of sports betting, which is mobile sports betting. It is the it's the holy grail of sports betting in the U.S. to make sure that the industry really kicks off. So we're very excited about that. That is a positive, I think, across the board for everybody that's both on the panel and also any of the attendees that are interested in the industry. The fact that mobile will likely lead the charge and already leads the charge in revenue in states like New Jersey, we should be excited about the potential for mobile betting being similar across the country in other states that are looking to legalize, or other states that are looking to change their existing legal structure to allow for a more mobile-friendly environment.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about mobile later in the webinar. But Rick, how about you? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'll pile onto that because a lot of that is really important, but just some numbers, right? So you have, the reason mobile is so ridiculously important is because so much more revenue can come to the states for that, and the states are looking for revenue. We've seen just this week 3 different states move forward. A referendum in Maryland, there's one about to pass in Louisiana, and we saw a movement on the California bill this week. So those are things that we're seeing move much faster than we thought they were going to move, and all the predictive metrics thought 2023 would be where we'd have a full penetration of sports betting, but now it's going to go a lot faster than that. And that's because people are starving for the ability to engage with their sports, and not having the ability to go to the bar or be able to go to the stadiums themselves or the venues themselves. They're going to need to do it socially. And so, Fantasy Life and apps like that bring people together and create community will be strong in that. And then the ability to tack on wagering platforms next to that will really move it. The other thing about that the pandemic has done, the positive thing about having slowed and stopped sports, is having worked for 31 years in sports. I know that there's always a constant grind for the next thing. The next sport is coming. There's only really one day that you're off from sports, and that's the day after the All-Star game in the summertime. And ESPN runs their ESPYs that night, so you have to cover that too. So you're constantly busy. This gap of 2 months that we've had here right now has allowed people to innovate, and they'll begin to innovate, and we're going to see some real innovations. People are going to bring the real world things like being in venue. You're going to see watch parties that look like a stadium and feel like you're virtually in the stadium. And we're going to see all the real world things move to the virtual world, just like we did in the 90s before, when they were moving the first scoreboards. Everything was being moved onto the internet initially. Now what we'll see is everything that's in the real world that couldn't be put on the internet, people will innovate and figure out how to do that.
And Ed, what do you think? What about the sports betting customer especially? How will they emerge different, and how should operators, anyone in the industry, really think about reaching them?
There is going to be a big difference. It's clear. I mean, we surveyed 4,400, which is a large number across the country. Couple things we saw, and they tie really well into what Rick and Yasin were saying. Although they're going to come back in droves, we know that. They can't wait for this to start. There's less disposable income that's out there. So that means a couple of things. One, it means they're going to want to go to places, to sites where functionality, and the most important part about functionality is that they can redeem their money quickly. And they've felt in the past that there are sites that haven't let them do that as easily and quickly as they want. And if they aren't able to redeem their money, they're not coming back. And they openly talked about that. They're also having less income. We're going to be looking at sites where maybe there's more creative ways to play or to bet, where they can win easier to do things. You have a very educated group that we spoke to. Over 50% of those who we interviewed who bet regularly have a BA degree versus the norm in the country, only 33% have. And they're going to be looking, they'll travel. 20% of those bettors in New Jersey come from New York. They'll use mobile, and they'll be loyal to those sites where they really do have a greater opportunity to win. The last thing I'll say is that, per what Rick said, we all know that there's going to be very little fan participation at the games. The interesting thing that they told us, though, almost 75% said even if they could go back right away to the games, they wouldn't. They fear going back. But what they said was, we want more creative ways to engage with these platforms. So it's some of the things Rick said. Are there new types of creative ways to play? More interactive communities, as he said, using streaming video. The ways you're going to be able to interact and be able to hopefully engage and maintain loyalty, it's going to be a whole new outlook in terms of what's going to keep this sports bettor or fantasy player active on your site.
And I want to dive a little bit more into some of these findings that from the survey showed us on who the sports bettor is. But before we do so, I just want to remind everyone that there is a Q&A function where you should feel welcome to submit any questions that you have, and we will try to touch on them in the next hour. Thinking a little bit more about who the sports bettor is, one of the findings that struck me was this huge overlap between sports betting and fantasy sports. I think it's something that we all suspected, but 89% of sports bettors in this survey said that they also played fantasy sports. Yasin, maybe you can speak a little bit to this. What should the industry take away from this?
I mean, I think it's really obvious that the entry point for sports betting is fantasy. Fantasy is the gateway to sports betting. So you're taking a look at these overseas operators who are interested in gaining a US market share. And the obvious answer to them, and this study actually makes it very clear, is to win in the US market, you need to capitalize on fantasy. Fantasy is it's the foundation of betting and gaming in the US. And that's very different from more established markets like in Europe or the UK or Australia, where fantasy didn't have to take off because sports betting was already legal. But in the US, and again, the study proves that 89% of those that bet on sports also play fantasy. And of those that also play fantasy, 87% of them consider fantasy to be a very solid knowledge base for them in making sure that they are, strong bettors. That's important. That's very important when you're looking to grow an audience, when you're looking for an entry point, when you're looking for how to brand and how to move people from the top of the funnel, which is fantasy, to the bottom of the funnel, which is sports betting and everything in between. Now, the US is interesting because we know that you got to become a sports bettor through fantasy. The numbers prove that. But the additional layer here is the market is not penetrated whatsoever. There's still a massive pool of potential bettors that have not yet been converted. And the right way to convert them is to educate them down through the funnel from people who are very into and passionate about fantasy, and educate them and show them how the things that they already know and the principles that they already follow for fantasy can be applicable and give them an edge when it comes to sports betting. And if operators or sports books don't acknowledge that, they are setting themselves up for failure. But it seems like sports books are understanding that fantasy is the gateway. You see deals happening where FanDuel was actually bought by Paddy out in the UK, and you have Barstool, which has a brand and an audience that has a lot of overlap with the fantasy audience, is now in partnership with Penn. Penn's typical audience was not a sports betting audience. It was a casino brick and mortar play, and they understand that the value is acknowledging that fantasy is the foundation for the industry as a whole.
And I think that's a good example too for anybody who doesn't have an existing fantasy business. You know, you're an operator and that's not something you're fully involved in. It's not your business, but there are perhaps other ways that you can engage with that audience, even if it's not your core business model.
If I could tack onto that for a second. Yeah. So look, basically you're saying learn, play, win becomes learn, bet, win, which is exactly what we're trying to do over at FantasyAlarm and at wageralarm.com. But just so that you know what kind of the numbers are, when I started in 1989, there were 550,000 people playing. Now there are over almost 65 million people who play fantasy sports, and that's just in North America. That's not outside of that. And some people think that fantasy was invented in North America, and it, obviously fantasy football invented in 1962 by Bill Winkenbach, who was part of John Madden's organization in Oakland. But the UK has had fantasy soccer for a very, very long time, and fantasy cricket. And the NBA penetrated fantasy in China with Fantasy a long time ago. And this has been around for a very, very long time. And now those same people who play fantasy in China also do in-game betting on NBA, now that that's the popular thing. And in England, it's in-game betting, in-game betting. That's all you hear. The same people do still play fantasy.
And I want to talk a little bit about regulation, and we just had a question come through that I think speaks to this quite well. The question from John in the audience is, do you believe that retail sports books will limit the amount of locations and jobs as mobile betting rises and COVID procedures are in place? I'll open this up to whoever wants to take that one.
I'm always glad to give an opinion. So I think it's all about the bottom line for everybody in every business. And I think when the brick and mortars analyze this and the less personnel are needed in order to be able to handle less people in their venues, that they will take down the number of employees or the number of personnel that they have to have. They will need more folks for the mobile side and the technology side of their business, and they're different personnel sometimes, but in some cases, service personnel and community, like I said, bringing things from real world onto the net will happen. So the guy who would normally have concierged the big whale who flew in from Dubai will still do that, but he'll do that online. And so I think you'll see those things move to online in a different form, and the personnel will be redeployed, and some personnel will be lost.
I think what COVID did is accelerate that process. It accelerated the need for it. I think this was eventually going to happen anyway. Brick and mortar was always going to have its role, but you take a look at New Jersey, the numbers in New Jersey are, you compare online/mobile to brick and mortar business, it's night and day. Mobile is dominating the amount of handle that's coming in. So this was an inevitability. COVID is just fast tracking that. So I agree with Rick. I think that the personnel are going to change quite a bit. They have to start looking at themselves as technology companies, or at least companies that really embrace technology to make sure that they are delivering the same level of white glove service that they're used to delivering at the location, but they need to understand the experience, the white glove experience, and how to deliver that via a mobile and web version of their offering.
Just to add to Yasin and echo him, COVID created a different need, but if you look even at the study with what the bettors are saying, it's all about the experience, and the experience is the brand, and that becomes the brand. And most of these bettors talked about the fact that, I don't have the number on me, I think it's almost 3/4 wanted a mobile experience, period. And if they could find a mobile experience, they would go to that platform more often than through a website, than through normal. So it was bound to happen anyways, and I agree with Rick, simply that you'll have new types of jobs that are needed, whether it comes to technology, operations, marketing, brand, as this becomes more of a mobile story, and that's clearly where we're at this point.
Thinking
one more small thing on that. So the qualifications for being technology driven aren't the same as they used to be. I mean, when I got out of college, you know, and we were at IBM, 1 out of 7 people had a computer on their desk, and we were with IBM. So, you know, the computer proliferation didn't exist. Now, every single person globally has a smartphone, basically is a computer operator. Like every single person on the planet knows how to use a computer because they hold one in their hand every day. So some of those jobs that we're calling tech jobs, if you will, you know, they're not really tech jobs. They're, you know, almost all Americans are qualified for them. They, you know, we're just calling them tech jobs, if you will.
I think my point on the technology and needing to embrace that has a lot more to do with how do you deliver the experience, which, you know, the study showed that the experience matters and that bettors are expecting certain types of things in the platform. They want an all-in-one experience, down from, you know, the social experience and the community experience with each other, to being able to bet on a platform, to getting advice on a platform. They do want all-in-one because we, especially millennials and Gen Z, we've grown up to expect high-level technology and high-level, impactful and strong, convenient plays that let you do what you want to do without having to jump around from app to app or service to service. So when we talk about it being a technology company and the roles that are needed, the goal is the same: deliver white glove service and deliver a seamless experience for your users. And you can, but doing that in a brick and mortar location is vastly different and requires a completely different skill set. To deliver a mobile or tech equivalent experience, to provide that digitally just requires a completely different set of talent on your staff.
Thinking beyond, you know, retail sports books in particular, I'm curious to hear from, and Rick, maybe you want to start this one off. There are still many states that have regulated sports betting that don't have mobile capabilities yet, and there are other states that are trying to move forward with regulation, again, not offering mobile or with very high restrictions on it. In that landscape, how do you think the products are going to vary across the country, the innovation, as we think about some states having mobile, other states not having it, and what does that ultimately mean for the overall marketplace?
Yeah, so the Fantasy Sports Gaming Association, which started as the Fantasy Sports Players Association, believe it or not, in 1998, was to educate legislators. And that's the important thing, is we need to make sure that the legislators are educated so that they can make the right decision and not be afraid of mobile, but instead embrace it. In many cases, lobbyists for different factions, whether it's the casinos or the Indian reservations, are fighting pretty hard in order to make sure that they keep their stronghold on sort of the casino business, because it's good for, and the state thinks it's good for them, the casinos think it's good for them, the communities think it's good for them. So it's fear really that stops a lot of the states from you know, moving to mobile. I asked FSGA President Stacey Stern to give me the case study about the difference between New Jersey and Mississippi, since they both went legal at the same exact time. And the information there is demonstrably different. I mean, you can see that the mobile revenue alone, the handle, is 10 times as much as the total handle in Mississippi. And now New Jersey has about a 2.5 times population, but it's 10 times bigger. And the overall revenues are just, you know, gigantic in Jersey. And then people who have mobile are more likely to go into brick and mortar places. And so we are seeing, by example, and specifically by New Jersey's example, that it's important for the mobile aspect to be for the community and also for the state to drive revenues at a time when revenues are very difficult to get for states, and they need to provide more services and things for folks who, you know, associated with this pandemic. So the opportunity when sports does come back without fans, for them to garner revenues for those things is going to be incredibly important. And mobile is the key to that whole thing.
Along the same lines, though, is there a danger in rushing too quickly to regulation? Like, I mean, we don't want to jump into things too fast, right? What are some of the things that we need to be considering before we move into regulating?
Well, you know, every bill in every state is different. Like, for instance, when Pennsylvania launched their bill, it had a $10 million licensing fee for each company that wanted to be able to do gambling within their state. So you saw only a very few number of people beginning that at first, and then others thinking they could steal the whole market share by diving in. So when the barrier to entry is easier, and when it's coordinated with the state so that it happens slowly, that is when we've seen the best results. So that it's not like, you know, 400 different licensees, but it's enough licensees to create the competition in the marketplace that's necessary.
And Ed, I want to switch gears a little bit. Another one of the findings that struck me from the study was that more respondents actually cared about things about like ease of payouts and security when they were choosing a betting platform, rather than sort of the overall brand or things like the variety of bets you can make. How should operators be thinking about that as they try to set their brands apart?
Well, I think some of those functional criteria are key. Again, I think what we're seeing, I'll call this, Rick would probably call this the 8th wave or 9th wave, because as he's talked about, he's been around a long time. I'll call this more the 2nd wave, pre-COVID and post-COVID. They're going to be a lot more choosy. There's more and more bettors and fantasy players coming into this market. And to engage and build loyalty, it's going to be harder and harder. These functional issues are bread and butters, table stakes that they're going to have on there. The brand part of this, though, was very important. And over 50% of the respondents said what that brand is and what the reputation is going to mean a lot to me. And the way they see it, and I see it as a marketer, is there's a lot of sea of sameness out there. Many of the sports books look, they might have different colors, different visual brand dynamics, but if you go on the books, the betting's the same, the way they do it is the same, the words are the same, not much different. I think, so there's the experience, but then even there's how do you communicate and market to your audiences in a way that's going to set you apart? There's so many messages going out via Facebook. Everybody markets via Facebook. It's obviously a key channel. It's cheap. It's easy to go. But I think that, and it's not just operators, it's anyone who's looking to do is have to think about a couple of different things when they're thinking about their audience and how they're building their brand. One, let's talk about an audience that's forgotten, women. Women are growing larger and larger in this group. 28% of our respondents were women. That's a large amount. We went out to get any bettors who are also fantasy players that we could find. So let's say the real number is 15 or 18%. It's growing quickly. How do you reach women? It's different. What do they care about? They care about recommendations from a friend. They care about the mediums they go to. Pinterest, Twitter. How are you using thought leadership? What types of tips and different content are you able to give women? You know, mobile is really key that they talked about in terms of wanting to use mobile more to be able to play fantasy or be able to make their bets. So targeting women is a whole different thing in terms of how you look at that. And then Yasin talked about millennials and Gen Z, and I think that's really important because there's different audiences. Millennials, Facebook is really important. But a lot of times if you look at Facebook, especially as football starts up, we'll see hundreds of thousands of ads that again fall into that same type of thing of DFS this or sportsbook this, or I'm going to give you this discount. How can you basically use it in a different way? Might you do display advertising on a very local focused sport in a different way to get your brand out there? Or even how you talk with the media about what you do has to be very different. Generation Z, which is really the newest, fastest growing, what do they look at? Instagram, cool new mediums. They want influencers they care about. Give a little plug to my friend Yasin, Matthew Berry. They all watch Matthew Berry and listen to what he cares about. How do you leverage that kind of information and how you are pushing out your brand and your messages to make sure it's coming across the right way so you're not in that sea of sameness? That's going to be really important to get any engagement and then to get loyalty as well.
And we have another question from the audience that I think is a good follow-up to this. Betting in the US is at least a decade behind the UK and Ireland in regards to experience, mobile, and marketing and advertising. How long do you think it will take to catch up?
It'll be much quicker. We're 10 years, maybe because we are currently where we were, where those other markets were 10 years ago. But the pace of technology is much quicker now. The rate of adoption and the tech literacy of users is much higher. So it's not going to take 10 years to get there. The technology side of things won't take that long to catch up. What will take a longer time to catch up is, again, moving people from the top of the funnel and bringing them down to become sports bettors. There's education that's needed. There's brand alignment that's needed. There are, even in the report, they did a lot of research into what is important, what's a reason to choose a betting platform. But those people that they were talking to were already sports bettors. So they are people that, so we're not necessarily getting an idea of what the future potential sports bettors are looking at. Those are people that are already established and already betting. But there's the majority, the opportunity in the US, the penetration rate is so low that we have to start thinking about, okay, what is the experience that's needed and wanted by people who are not yet sports bettors, but are the most likely to convert? Essentially, and the study proved this, it's fantasy players. So how do we move them down? What technologies are they used to? And what is the learnings that they are going to have to go through? Where are they on the learning curve? So that where their comfort level is finally matches the technology that will eventually catch up very quickly to the other technologies and resources that are out there in more developed markets. But I think, I don't think the technology is going to be far behind at all for very long. I think it has the place where there's an opportunity for innovation and faster movement is in the education of users that are going to be the majority of sports bettors in 2, 3, 4 years.
Well, I
think reminds me of a conversation I had with a VC in the space who was telling me that really the innovators who are going to break out in betting in the next couple of years are like whoever can make the Zynga for sports betting, right? Like what's appealing to women, what's appealing to people who are not the casual bettor? What does that platform look like?
And as far as catching up with England and Ireland, the way they're going to catch up is actually use exactly the same technology, because if you think about it, the back end of DraftKings was Kambi. They're building their own right now, but it was Kambi, which was a British company. And then Paddy Power bought FanDuel, so they already have Ireland's technology there. And William Hill is one of the biggest providers, along with PointsBet, who are both international companies as well. So the technology actually for the actual betting has already been brought here, especially on the mobile apps that are dominating. They're all foreign apps.
The interesting thing is that I bet if you took 10 fantasy sports players who've never gone online to bet with a sports book, 7 or 8 of them would get on that sports book and not understand half the terminology.
Yes, 100%. That is where the branding issue comes in. That needs to change. That's where the education is important. And it's because, look, I'm a fantasy guy. I understand sports betting. Most of my users are fantasy people. If they went on to a lot of these sports books right now, they're going to, very simple questions that are very easy to explain, but there is no acknowledgement that you need to move people down the funnel to educate them, to explain simple things like, what is that negative number? What does the lowercase o mean? Why are there so many numbers on this page? Who are these people that I'm reading about? It's a foreign language. And when you have an established industry trying to reintroduce itself to a new market where you are completely new, you need a completely different mindset. And that's where I think the most impactful, there are going to be 2 roles at each of these sports books that are going to be the most impactful on whether or not they're going to succeed in the US. It's going to be the people that are on the merger and acquisition side or the innovation team. And it's going to be the people that are the CMOs, the marketing side. How do you penetrate this specific audience? Because it's completely different. And the way that they're executing right now, I'm sorry to say, is not correct because you're talking over the heads of most of the people that are your prime audience to convert. And we're just speaking a completely different language to them.
I think the other thing I was going to add to that also is that, so if the move clearly is for fantasy sports platforms potentially to go into betting, which makes all the sense in the world, based on what Yasin was pointing out in the beginning, then loyalty is absolutely critical with the base you're building now, because that's the easiest way to transform that base into bettors. And so how you build loyalty now through the experience and what you do is really critical. And that's really what the platform should be thinking about, so that fantasy sports player is coming back over and over and over again.
All right, well, stay tuned for Wager Alarm University coming out this summertime.
Oh, I'm excited.
Me too.
Well, before the pandemic hit, we saw betting operators invest pretty heavily in the content side of things. Yasin mentioned Penn National's deal for Barstool, which had a crazy valuation of $450 million for Barstool. FanDuel and DraftKings have been doing a ton in the content space, partnering with lots of publishers. There was a report just this week in The Information that publishers like The Athletic, The Action Network, Bleacher Report are looking to do a lot more deals. Talk to me a little bit about the role that you see content playing and how that's going to either pick up or just how that'll change coming out of the pandemic. And we can go around the room on this one. So Rick, why don't you we'll start with you and then we'll.
All right, yeah, because I can tell the story from way back in the day and about how nothing has changed since then. So Peter Naughton, who founded Sun Microsystems, as the internet was exploding in 1994, in late 1994, before it really started to move, he said content personalization and interactivity wins every web war. So I think you can take that to every website, and we have a CPI rating on all of our products at FantasyAlarm and Wager Alarm to make sure they have content, personalization, and interactivity. Obviously, the most interactive app out there is Fantasy Life, right? So that has interactivity in spades. But you need to make sure that you have content, personalization, and interactivity in everything that you do. So that's why Barstool was so important. It wasn't just a content play. It wasn't just a whole bunch of writers putting stuff out there. It was also a platform where people could bet for free and then actually win real money or real prizes if they won their wagers. So they could qualify every single one of those people as a sports bettor. And then when they sold part of their company to Penn National knew exactly what they were getting. They didn't know it was like, hey, we hope most of our customers do this. Hope is not a management strategy, and people shouldn't be using that as that. They proved it, and that's why they got their payoff. So you can see when you're building a content company, you need to build technology into it as well, because the numbers are important, the platforms, the dashboards are important, and then the opinions are important. No good system that can pick winners just by pushing a button and having a computer run and figure out exactly what it is. Humans need to be involved because humans are the ones who are playing the sports. So you need to combine both technology and content in order to win. And Naughton had it right from the very beginning in 1995.
Yasin, what do you think?
You have to ask the question again. When Rick speaks, I listen because he's legendary. So I was so enthralled by his story. You're going to have to ask it again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I want to know what role content plays in attracting sports bettors. And I also want to know if you think that's going to change coming out of the pandemic.
I'll answer it backwards. I don't know that it's going to change. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't. It might have to go through an evolution of the type of content that's out there. But in terms of, the role of content, in my opinion, it has a lot to do with educating. Because again, I have a very, very firm view on the US market. You need educating to move people along that funnel, to move them down towards sports betting, towards becoming sports bettors. And without that, you're talking to them in a different language. It doesn't matter how many $1,000 offers you're giving to them to place a bet with you. You don't have their ear. Your message, your $1,000 offers are falling on deaf ears. So content is a way to solve that, so that your $1,000 offers they'll be receptive to it because they understand what it means and they'll know what to do with it. But otherwise, if you gave fire to a caveman who'd never seen fire before, what are they going to do from it? They're going to run away. It's intimidating. But if you show them that it's a tool and that it's something that they can use to adapt their strategy with, then all of a sudden you have somebody who's very well equipped to be a member of a fire-using society. But until then, you're intimidating people. So yeah, I think content has everything to do with educating people and moving them further along the funnel, educating them, moving them from fantasy to sports betting. Fantasy went through the same evolution. Rick, you said it was 500,000 people back in '82.
Yeah,
And
550,000 in 89.
So in 89, 550,000. If there wasn't an element of educating, and I know it took a long time to educate people on what fantasy is, break the mold and the brand of it's just for nerdy people that like to look at data and stats in a newspaper, that evolution happened. And fantasy did a great job of storytelling to move people along and educate them so that they can become effective, fun, enjoyable leagues that people play in now because they went through that evolution in that process. But until then, you had to evolve from just watching a game on a Sunday to being a game manager in a fantasy league that you're going to follow year round. And now the numbers in fantasy went from 500,000 in 89 to 65 million in the US now. So I think content has everything to, content is a major key when it comes to the success of the industry of sports betting in the US. But we have to direct that content to be more educational, guide people down, letting them know, answering the simple questions like why is there a minus number? What am I betting on? What does this mean? Those really simple questions can be easily answered in a very conversational way. That's what we aim to do. It's not rocket science, and we try to simplify everything that we do to acknowledge that, you know, there's an educational need. The conversion will happen. You can't push it, but until then, you're going to lose out on those users because you're intimidating them and not talking their language.
And Ed, is there anything you want to add on that?
I don't know if I can add anything to what these two great panelists have said. No, they give a lot of great information, but I'm going to add something. To me, it's intuitive. There's a reason why a fantasy life has grown to, I don't even know what it is, 300,000 or 400,000 users who come.
Way more.
600,000. How's that? The numbers are giant, but the point is that for fantasy, think how much time all of your fantasy players spend doing your research, spend getting your content, your information, your advice. It's a lot of time, right? And Fantasy Life is a great example of one that they go to for all that, especially the news tips. But the reality is that if you didn't have to spend so much time going from one platform to another platform, to Googling what's the best place to go to get tips, to wondering if it's reputable or not, and you could actually just go to one place where you can receive that much more value because you're either able to have some kind of chat with hundreds of other bettors or fantasy sports players on the same platform, receive really good advice and content and other things that are going to make you that much smarter, give you that much more value, and save you time. Of course, people are going to flock towards that. So to me, it's intuitive. So the real question is, as more platforms acquire, buy, build, but you're going to see a lot of acquisition happening with content sites and others, how good does the experience become? It's Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come, but will they stay? That's the question. It really depends on what the experience will be and if they're able to integrate it really well to build that engagement. But to me, it's very intuitive that this is going to happen more and more and more. Just to give you the stats, 69% of our study respondents said they desire betting tips on their platform. 50% really want engaging editorial content on what they should bet on, and 34% wanted the ability to communicate with other users. By the way, that's like those are the numbers who said they really want it. There are also numbers that are much higher that said, sure, we'd take it. So you're going to see as these things start happening, they're happening better, it's going to become more of a norm that they're going to expect, I think, from the places they go to.
When you talk about engagement, that's basically what you're talking about, right? You're talking about, you know, folks who are who want to be more engaged with the people that exist in the community. And I think the other day I expressed to you guys, you know, everybody just wants to feel like they belong. So, you know, that's everybody just wants to be able to go to a site, and I would add not just engage with the other users, but engage with like-minded users. So they want to be, when they're talking about sports, they want to talk, if they're a real passionate sports fan, they want to be talking to other passionate sports fan. Not that somebody who's going to cower from the argument that they want to have because they're not as passionate about it as they are. And if they're a casual fan, they don't want to have somebody, you know, ripping down their neck because they're too passionate. So it's a matter of being where you belong, I think, and a website can create that experience, or an app can create that experience that makes you feel like you belong.
And I have one last question for all of you before we move back into some audience questions. And I know there are a couple, but if anyone else has questions, please do submit them into the Q&A section. My last question, we'll do a round robin. This last year, the last couple months really have been pretty wild and unpredictable. And I'm going to ask you guys to look ahead to the next year, into 2021. Give me your biggest prediction for how you think the industry is going to change in the next year.
I'm happy to, oh, you're asking them. Great.
We'll start with you, Rick.
All right. So, I mean, what I'll say is there'll be more things taken from the real world and moved to the fake world, if you will. Like, look, I'm a self-proclaimed geek, right? So when I was creating all these programs for IBM, I was creating these role-playing games, if you will. You know, like you're Thor in a woods and you have to fight with this guy, or you know, and there were a lot of different ones where, hey, you're a guy in a bar and, you know, you have to go find friends, or you got to go beat the guy in the pool tournament. And so there were a lot of just like simulation stuff for before geek was cool. So now I think some of those things will be brought from the real world, because people won't want to be going to movies where they might have to sit next to somebody closely. Places, you know, venues, places where they would have to, you know, even wearing a mask is sometimes uncomfortable. People will do more things at home, and they'll be trying to create those experiences virtually. And think about what the studios do now to make these movies so unbelievable, and how those real virtual worlds could be brought to folks to be able to do the things that they did outside, whether it's, I'm going to go to a bar, I'm going to grab a drink out of my fridge, and I'm going to hang out at the bar. And you're physically going to look like exactly like you're hanging out at the bar. Or I'm going to watch the Giants today. 100,000 other people will be watching, and it'll be like you're in the stadium. So I think those innovations are the kinds of things you'll see during the next 9 months until we have a vaccine. And even after we have a vaccine, some people will choose the virtual worlds over the real world, just like they did when those innovations happened 2.5 decades ago.
And Yasin, I want to hear your prediction, but we also have one more poll for those of you in the audience. Please take a look at that poll. We'd love for you to participate and let us know what you think about partnerships in the space. Back to you, Yasin. Give us your prediction for the next year in sports betting.
I think the safest prediction to make is that there's going to be a lot of money spent very inefficiently. I think there's going to be so much effort and so many offers that are going to be put out there to try to capture this audience. And I think most players out there are going to do it very poorly. And I hate to say it, I don't enjoy that. It doesn't please me to say it, but I think it's a safe prediction. I think that's going to have a cascade of, a domino effect, if you will, of sports books and platforms that are going to give up too early without iterating and A/B testing the right way. And this comes back to my point about why I think CMOs and the branding side of things is actually the most impactful group at a sports book that's trying to capture a US audience, because the ones that go about things that blend the quantitative data feedback that they get from their marketing campaigns with the qualitative approach and the an understanding of the landscape as a whole, those are going to be the ones that are going to succeed. The ones that test properly, that find the right types of partners, that understand where the US is in terms of what part of the funnel overall is overfilled, and how do we move people further down that funnel. I think very few are going to get it right. I think the ones that are going to get it right are going to be innovative. They're going to be technology based. They're going to have a diverse executive team. That's not just racial diversity, that's also gender diversity. To Ed's point earlier about females being a widely underserved portion of the market, I think that holds true. So I think it's not only do you have to be able to cater to the more traditional sports bettor who might be maybe even older than millennial, maybe you need to cater your messaging specifically to millennials and Gen Zs, and treat them far differently than you would any other segment of the audience. But I think overall, you're going to see a lot of money being spent and not a lot of results being seen, because there's an eagerness to spend the money, and I don't think that there's a real good grasp of what the US market actually looks like. So that's my prediction. I think, like I said, I'm sorry to say it, and I'm not happy to say it, but I think there will be a lot of inefficient money spent. I think they need to spend wisely, and the CMOs are going to be the most important part of that puzzle.
Ed, what's your prediction?
Yes, you should have been sitting in my marketing chair. The way you said that. Well, I hope my joke was going to be then I hope they come to Hot Paper Lantern Digital Sport and we can help them do it right. But since you talked about marketing, I'm going to go in a different direction. 3 letters, IPO. DraftKings made a major statement by continuing to do its IPO and did it in the middle of the biggest pandemic that we've had in 100 years. And look at where they are now. $4 billion or $200 million company comes out of $4 billion, they're 5 times as big as that. Why? It is a major statement. Why? The regulatory change, how quickly states are going to be opening up now, how the billions of new bettors that are going to be coming, the money coming in. I think in the next 18 months, 24 months, we will see 6, 8, 10, 12 of these IPOs. I think we'll have new names of companies we've never even heard of right now. Some of that will be through Merger Mania. That'll happen with new names sprouting up, and some will be companies that just make it really quickly. And if you are doing it right, you're able to build something that really is sustainable, brand and market it in the right way, and it's engaging. It is amazing how quickly you can grow as sports is coming back and what you can do in this type of market conditions.
I'm going to turn it over. I think we only have time for one last question, so we're going to take one more question from the audience. This is a topic we haven't touched on. So this question comes from Chase. Chase asks, sports betting infrastructure between traditional and non-traditional sports is very different. What is the market opportunity for esports?
I'll be glad to take that. I happen to be on the board of the Esports Trade Association, a Chicago-based nonprofit organization that is attempting to understand and bring the industry together, similar to what the Fantasy Sports Gaming Association did in 1998, to understand who the players are and have them help each other. The ecosystem there does not really exist yet. There isn't really a league operator, a players association. There aren't a lot of agents for the athletes themselves. There is an infrastructure across colleges now that will help feed to the pro leagues, if you will, and create a training ground where we can have more pro leagues. But right now, the esports infrastructure for that doesn't exist. But let's talk about what we're really talking about when we say esports, because everybody says esports, but that's not what they mean. What they really mean is video games. What is the cross-section of video games with the things that we're talking about right here? And, you know, the same social elements that exist in youth sports or in sports in general that allow people to embrace sports and love sports should exist for video games as well. And it kind of does in a smaller way, basically online, but there isn't any community outreach or community for it. So I think what you're going to see in the future is that parents are going to embrace video games instead of rejecting them, and that it's going to be a social element for those who love video games instead of love, say, baseball. And it will have the ability for it to create a set of leagues for youth that allow them to engage, feel important, gain confidence, be better humans, contribute more to society, and all of those things can happen with any hobby, to be honest. But whether you're in the chess club or whatever growing up, to make you feel like you belong in an area, so people who embrace video games will then feel like they belong and then be able to be better societal contributors. So that's what I think. As far as the business side goes, I mean, we're just really not sure yet, as all those things are playing out, you know, with the control of leagues, teams, et cetera. You know, those things are playing out now. But I think it has a broader reach for society in general.
Just to jump in, we represent a number of platforms that have targeted esport users and, you know, Gen Z, even younger. It's a great audience for fantasy platforms overall. Clearly, it's growing. It's going to be big. Right now, it's hard to make money off esports. It's not a group that spends money. It's sexy. It was something that became pretty big, and they were doing a ton of deals over the last couple of months as sports were down. It'll keep growing, but I think it's hard for platforms to partner with them and to make money at this time. It's very challenging to do that. But I would assume, per what Rick is talking about, as it grows, that might change.
Similar to like, golf or NASCAR. All the golfers want to do is play golf. All the drivers want to do is drive. All the good, best esports players, all they want to do is play and win tournaments. They don't want to know about the business side. They don't really they just know they're great, and they'll tell you they're great. And but they haven't figured out how to monetize their success and their greatness yet, and they will. They'll figure it out.
Great. And with that, I think we're going to end on that note. I would like to thank all of you for joining us today for this Sports Are Back webinar hosted by Hot Paper Lantern Digital Sport. A special thank you to Yasin and Rick for being here today and joining Ed and I in this conversation. And again, remember, this is just part one. Be on the lookout for an email that should let you know the next webinar, which will be in July, sorry, not January, July. And you should also receive a download link to Hot Paper Lantern Digital Sports next, the study that we discussed here today called The State of the New Sports Bettor. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to continuing the conversation online.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you,
Ashley.